Since 2008, there's been these conglomerations, BlackRock, Vanguard, companies like this who basically own everything, bought up at a nice cheap price all of these shares of all these like film production companies. And the thing about these firms is they have a very short term way of looking at the world. They look at the world through the quarterly report. They only care about whether or not their numbers are going up or down by the time the quarterly report comes in. So they only want safe bets and ensure that their investments are on the up and up. And of course, that's bad for art. These capital firms aren't really interested in writers or filmmakers, so they get the short end of the stick. The unions were able to get some concessions made, and there seems to be kind of like this back and forth between writers that feel like, yep, I think that the deal will turn out in the end. And there are people that are just like, it was a bad deal, we're fucked. So these capital firms limiting what these Hollywood film studios can do and harping on IP over and over again as sort of the safe bet in order to try to make as much money as they can so that when the quarterly report comes in, the people at BlackRock who don't make movies, they don't care about movies, can look at it and be like, yep, I like it. They're totally uninterested in taking artistic chances. And so the writers then have to debase themselves to write about the second Super Mario Brothers movie or something like that. It's just like impossible to make a living in Hollywood, even if you're working on the most successful movie or the most successful TV show. One of the things that writers could do in order to gain more power is demand to own complete copyright for the stories they create instead of doing this separated rights thing, which allow a writer to use a script and its characters for limited purposes. So writers would have more power over their stories than they do now. But if we're just doing the same thing over and over again, I don't think it bodes well.
We saw the same thing in the late 1950s, early 1960s, which of course led to sort of the independent film revolution.
But even then, Austin, would you rather watch a movie from the 1950s from that time
Of
period
course I
right
was.
before that? You see what I mean? I understand that there's some similarities in history, but I do think we're at a very unprecedented time considering technology, the destruction of unions, deregulations as well, allowing these companies to buy up all these shares. The government probably needs to go in, break it up all apart, and allow more competition, more money coming in, people making more chances. So it's not just like the same four companies just making the same slop.
Here's what happened in the 1930s, and this is how they solved the problem then is what we're seeing now is this vertical integration. They own every part of the process where they own the production, they own post-production, and
They
they
own
own.
movie theaters.
And so the government had to come in and say, hey, you can't own movie theaters anymore. That's why MGM and stuff don't have their own movie theaters because it became illegal to do that.
But I don't even think that'll happen.
There is this era in like the 30s and 40s where there's just like a shit ton of shitty movies.
Right. There's plenty of bad movies.
And of course, we have part of this bias of like a lot of the bad movies don't survive because they were made on film.
Yeah.
And so, like, we miss a lot of it. But we have that same problem now where you have services like Netflix, Amazon,
Yeah. It's
Hulu,
like a
Disney
glut of
Plus.
shit.
They own the entire vertical production, right? Yeah, they don't own movie theaters, but it doesn't matter if people don't go to the movie theaters anymore. They might as well own the movie theater too because it's the same thing.
And streaming services are also unfair. They treat their writers terribly because they don't.
Because they don't care.
That was one of the things they were striking about is because the streaming services were not transparent with how well the show was doing, what was the data and analytics. By law, they're not required to do any of those things. And so the writers are unsure of how the show is doing. So that gives them less power because then they don't have less leverage to be able to argue about their pay and their benefits and things like that if they don't know how well the show is doing.
The thing that they care about now isn't quality. Netflix had this push for it because they're like, that's how we get people to the platform. But now it's just become whoever has the most shit. Because people are realizing that it's like $20 for each of these services, and I don't want to pay for like 15 fucking services because they've all separated. So Netflix only interest is quantity, which is why there's like 10 fucking thousand true crime documentaries because it takes like a fucking week. It costs almost no money to
You
do
barely
it.
need a writer.
You
Yeah.
really don't need writers, super cheap freelance editors. It does not cost anything to do it. And you just produce this obnoxious quantity of stuff.
And us piggies, we love to eat it up. Trying to rely on the government to break up these companies and stuff like that. It just doesn't seem like a realistic thing.
It only happened because of the Great Depression, right? Like that's the only reason they
Exactly.
broke up in the first place. So,
Yeah, a lot has changed in about 100 years.
yes.
And I know like movies in Hollywood, it's not the most important thing in the world going on right now. But entertainment, movies, things like that, that's like one of our most lucrative exports. So I don't think it's good that it's being cheapened and that it's being reduced to a product like a shampoo company or something like that.